If Joseph were to knock on your door this Christmas Eve, would you answer it? I can imagine myself home from the Christmas Eve service, curled up in my pajamas with a cup of hot chocolate, some Christmas treats, my wife and both cats all snuggled up on the couch in the TV room. The lights are off, except for the Christmas tree and our Moravian star. And we're just starting to watch some frivolous yet amusing Christmas movie on the television, when there is a knock at the door. I am very cozy and very tired after a busy day. Do I answer it? It's late and dark and cold and we are two women. Is it safe to answer it? What if it's someone in need of help this night? It's cold and snowy out. Maybe their car broke down or something else is wrong. How would I feel if it turns out to be someone in genuine need? Why else would they be knocking on my door at this hour of Christmas Eve? If Joseph were to knock at my door this Christmas, would I answer? And as I was pondering that question, I was disturbed by a news story from Ottawa, where a 15-year-old boy knocked on 6 doors one cold evening recently when his cell phone died, and he needed to get in touch with his mother for her to come and get him and take him home. He purposely picked houses where there were cars in the lanes and lights were on, since he didn't want to wake anyone up. And at each door he asked if he could call, or if they would call for him, his mother. And at each house he was turned away. The last house called the police, who came, and after determining that he didn't have any weapons and was indeed just a kid trying to get home, drove him home. That's not the kind of world I want to live in. I want a world where a teenager whose cell phone dies gets invited in to call his mom and served hot chocolate to warm up while he waits. Today we travel to Mexico in our Christmas Around the World series. You've already had the opportunity to participate a little bit in a simulated Posadas. The Los Posadas is a widespread custom in Mexico and in other parts of Latin America, as well as in parts in the United States with large Latino communities. It takes place for 9 days leading up to Christmas Eve, and each night the community reenacts Joseph and Mary seeking shelter in Bethlehem and being refused entry. Each night they are eventually admitted to a neighbor's house where the community celebration happens. The final night, Los Posadas sometimes ends at the church for midnight mass. And this is one of many Mexican traditions which make the story of the Nativity come alive in real time. Each year, people who participate in the Posadas act out what it feels like to be Mary and Joseph seeking shelter, and what it feels like to be the innkeeper refusing them entry. And there were also Christmas dramas called Los Posadas, which I'm probably pronouncing really wrong, and Vienna will tell me afterwards. But they recreate the shepherds looking for the baby Jesus, and all kinds of obstacles get in their way. What those obstacles are varies from year to year and region to region, but often involves the devil trying to prevent them from reaching the baby. They're not always PG. But eventually they make it to Bethlehem and find the Christ child. There's a very old tradition in Mexico dating from the time when Mexico was ruled by Spain. The indigenous peoples of Mexico had a rich tradition of worship that incorporated drama, singing, dancing before the arrival of the Spanish. Franciscan missionaries observed the power of such storytelling to move the community, and they started the tradition of nativity plays in 1528. Those plays have changed many times over the year, but the tradition of enacting the Christmas story still flourishes in many places. And Las Pastorales plays are often laced with social commentary about the struggles of the poor and marginalized today. Sometimes instead of shepherds, the group trying to find the Christ child are street urchins or rural farm workers. But the message is always about finding good even when evil tries to get in the way. Mexico is also big on nativity scenes called nacimiento. Only some Mexican families will have a Christmas tree, but almost every family will have a nativity scene. And these bright colored scenes often feature life-size figures, especially in the ones in churches and that cities and towns put up. And in addition to the usual figures of Mary and Joseph, the baby Jesus, who's usually added at midnight Christmas Eve, shepherds, wise men, and those things that we are usually familiar with, but Mexican nativity scenes often feature other features from everyday life. Women making tortillas, people selling in the market, other animals, birds, even sometimes including bright pink flamingos. So inspired by Mexican traditions, I want to invite us to consider for a moment the value of traditions which make the nativity story concrete and real in our time, and invite us to assume different roles in that story. One of the challenges with a favorite and beloved story from the Bible that we hear every year on Christmas Eve, in that special context of candles and carols and cherished childhood memories, is that we might stop noticing the story itself. We can lose the meaning of Christmas in nostalgia and tradition. So today, still 10 full days before Christmas, we are looking at the very first part of the traditional Christmas Eve story from Luke's Gospel, stopping before we get to the part about shepherds and angels, in the hopes that we might notice some things about the story that we might miss on Christmas Eve. So let's start at that very beginning of chapter 2. In the words of the King James translation of the Bible that some of you may have memorized as children, the story in Luke 2 begins like this. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. In other words, the story begins with the rich and powerful issuing a decree that messes up everyone else's lives. Imagine that someone suddenly came here, the church this morning, with a decree from the emperor stating that everyone had to go back to the town where their grandfather came from, right away, right now, to take part in a census. For some of us, that might only be a journey of a few miles, but for many of us, it would involve long-distance travel in the wintertime, sometimes across an ocean or two. The reason for this journey? Not to visit family and enjoy Christmas celebrations. The reason for this journey? The emperor wants to be sure that he is getting all the taxes that he should be, and that he knows how many men of military age there are that he can use in his various military campaigns. It is hard to imagine that precise thing happening to us here today, but there are still many people in our world who are displaced from home and family by forces outside their control, by the forces of empire. I think about the 20 or so people who have been camping in a wooded area by the Bayview LRT station in Ottawa for months. The community sprang up in the spring when a couple of nearby rooming houses burnt to the ground, leaving people without any place to go. The residents had planned to stay in the tent encampment throughout the winter. However, on November 22nd, a fire broke out in one of the tents, which led the National Capital Commission to decide that the tent city was unsafe. As a result, they have issued trespass orders and asked the residents to vacate the site. They are offering temporary accommodation in hotel rooms in another part of the city. However, residents are concerned about how they will get to work and other commitments if they move out of their neighborhood. These are mostly people without cars. And also concerned about what happens to them when the temporary hotel room offer runs out and they still don't have new permanent housing. I think of the 37,000 people a day, 37,000 people a day who are forced to flee their homes because of conflict and persecution, according to the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. Every minute in 2018, 25 people were forced to flee. There are now 70.8 million displaced people registered with the United Nations. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And I think of the record 69,550 children, separated from their parents and held in detention in the United States at some point in the past year, most of whom arrived in the United States through Mexico, but most of whom are not Mexican. 9 out of 10 children held in detention in the US in 2019 came from 3 countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, where they are fleeing violence, abuse, and even state-sponsored murder. It is so easy to be judgmental about people who are fleeing impossible situations. It makes us feel safer if we can imagine that such things could never happen to us. But they could. As Brené Brown writes, if your response is, the parents should not have brought their children here illegally, know this. I pray to God that you never have to flee violence or poverty or persecution with your children. And if the day comes that you must, and your babies are forcibly removed from your arms, I will fight for you too. I think many of us know something about being displaced from our sense of home too, even if we don't actually have to leave our physical home. Many forces outside our control can rent our lives apart. A sudden death, a crisis of faith, the loss of a dear friendship, the diagnosis of a serious illness, job loss, a fire or flood in our home, the breakdown of a marriage. And when things are falling apart in our lives, we may find ourselves knocking on literal or figurative doors to ask for help. And finding that some doors open to a genuine, hospitable welcome, while others remain firmly shut, and still others are opened grudgingly in ways that leave us feeling ashamed that we needed to ask for help in the first place. In our individualistic culture, it can take great courage to admit that we need each other. Knocking on a door to ask for help is very hard. If this adventure of being human, it's not something we can do on our own. Anne Lamott, whose book Almost Everything Notes on Hope, our Friday study group has just finished, describes it this way. Almost everyone is screwed up, broken, clingy, scared, and yet designed for joy. Even, or especially, people who seem like they have it more or less together are more like the rest of us than you would believe. I try not to compare my insides to their outsides, because that makes me much worse than I already am. Everyone needs help sometimes. So if you need help this Christmas, ask for it. Remember Joseph and knock on the door. And if you don't find a hospitable welcome the first time you knock, try again, or knock on a different door. The story of Mary and Joseph doesn't end in perfection. They don't find a cozy bed in a hospital, or even a warm house. But it does end with them finding enough. Enough shelter, enough compassion, enough room. So this Christmas, let's try to make sure that we all have enough. If someone is knocking on the door of your house or heart this Christmas, prayerfully consider if you might be able to help. The answer might be no. The answer might be there isn't room in the house at the moment, but I do have a stable. The answer might be come on in and pull up a chair. The fire's warm and we have food to share. But whatever the answer is, let us remember that we are all in this together. Whatever hospitality we can offer one another, let's do it with a warm and open heart, not begrudgingly or judgmentally. Because as Lutheran minister Emmy Kegel puts so clearly, if you ignore the witness of teenage girls, if you tell refugees go back where you came from, if you close your doors to dirty field laborers, if you turn a child over to a tyrant, please don't put up a nativity set this year. Let's remember this Christmas that the nativity story is one of God coming amongst us as one in need of welcome. May it be so.